So knowing that the experts get it wrong sometimes, knowing that I get it wrong sometimes, I decided that what I was going to do was I was going to send out this question: how do you evaluate really, really young wine for aging potential and enjoyability in the future? And I got back some pretty interesting answers. Now, these were all to people who they've got some skin in the game. You know, they're either doing their own blogs, they're wine writers, so when they recommend a wine, there's a good chance people are going to buy it for their own collection. They're retailers, so they're selling it knowing that people, you know, these are not the kind of people who are just selling wine on the floor at a restaurant where it's going to get drunk right away. It was interesting how some people just consider this, you know, such an art and so difficult. And other people are like, well, it's easy. It's tannins, acid, and balance. And so I actually had two out of the experts. I had one who's a pretty well-known wine writer on the East Coast to, you know, say, how are you going to turn this into a seminar? It's really quite simple. You're going to fill up 35 minutes with this? And then someone on the West Coast who actually is someone she deals with a lot and she works with a lot, who is a wine consultant and a retailer for collectors, said, you are asking for the keys to the kingdom. Maybe 10 people in the world really know how to do this. Good luck. So let's talk about what the majority of these 12 experts told me. When you're drinking a young wine, we know that it's not going to have secondary characteristics yet. We know it hasn't all come together into this beautiful marrying of structure and fruit. But you still can try to taste for a balance, even if it's angular. And one thing, you get the fruit first, and then the tannins, and then the acid, or whatever. So that's what I heard over and over and over again. Want a year where the fruit is ripe. There's nothing worse than a year where you get all, from the Cabernet, all those pyrazines, right? Or, you know, these kind of bitter flavors you get from unripe fruit. You want the fruit to be balanced. You don't want it to be overpowering. And you want it to be fresh. You know, just like you were saying with that raisiny stewed thing. You know, you can taste that early on when they're using overripe fruit. It's just that stewed quality in young wine. It's just, ugh. So you want to definitely stay away from underripe. Over-extracted can be very, very scary because typically over-extracted wines don't age that well. So you're trying to go for this ripe, delicious fruit. Acidity is a really hard thing to learn when you're first learning, you know, to taste the difference between tannins and acid. When you take a sip of a wine, after, you know, you swallow or spit it, if you then kind of put your head down and notice if you had opened, and keep your mouth closed, but if you had opened your mouth, would you be drooling? Then you know there's acidity in the wine. If that doesn't happen, then there's not enough acidity. And then, of course, when there's too little acid, we know all about that. Vintages that are very hot, you know, it just gets flabby. These are wines that are not going to age because the acidity is not going to hold up the structure. And then on to tannins. Tannins are what bring structure to wine. Tannins are what make wine have great mouthfeel. It's the ageability. It balances the fruit. That is probably the #1 reason that we love Bordeaux, because Bordeaux's have these beautiful tannins that give this wine this wonderful body that goes so well with the kinds of foods that we love to eat with Bordeaux. We know that grapes have a lot more tannin than almost than most fruits, right? And the reason that a grape has tannins is if you just assume that the grapevine, its whole motivation is two things, right, in the circle of life. It needs to survive, and it needs to reproduce. The raison d'etre for the grape is the reproduction of that grapevine. Just like for a pine tree, it's the pine cone, or a tomato plant, it's the tomato. That's where the seeds are. The problem is the majority of the life of the grape, it isn't ready to be eaten. So the tannins make it super, super off-putting. If you ever eat an unripe grape, a little tiny, you know, grape in May or April, You know, it's awful. The skin is super bitter, and the seeds, they're disgusting. They almost hurt when you eat them because they're raspy. And so that keeps birds and other living things from eating it. You know, it's a little green grape. It's hidden in the leaves. You know, all these things are to allow it to get to its reproductive maturity. And then, of course, we know tannins live in the oak barrels. How do wine makers manage tannins? There's a lot of new methods. They get the phenolic maturity perfect. In the old days, when they would decide when they were going to harvest, that was almost always based on Brix, right? It was sugar level, and that was the goal. They had a certain, each winemaker had an idea of a certain Brix they wanted those grapes to get to. They're out there in the vineyard eating grapes at harvest time, every couple hours, just trying to find that one perfect moment to do harvest where they're going to get the best day of that grape's life. Maceration methods. Nowadays, you've got a lot of people doing much longer cold maceration. That's going to change, again, the molecules, these polymers that make up tannins. If you do these longer macerations, you're not going to have those big tannic monsters that they used to have. You can definitely change how the tannic structure is going to be based on if you're fermenting in very large vats or very small. And then, of course, there's microoxidation. Microoxidation is a process. It takes machinery. And it's basically a way to decant an entire vat of wine. So we decant wine when we open a bottle. But imagine doing that for an entire vat that just fermented. So it allows a whole lot of oxygen to get pumped in right at a time where in the old days they never ever did that. But by doing that, it really changes the whole tannic structure. And then the last thing is alcohol. And like you said, you don't want it to only have alcohol. If at the end you can taste a overlay of alcohol, you probably know you've got a problem there.